In this video, I want to share with you one of the most powerful and effective modalities to transform your life, to shift patterns, and break through inner blocks that hold you back from living the life you truly want. I use it personally. I also use it with my clients and my students. And the cool thing is you can do it with a therapist, but also on your own. That's what makes it so magical. Now, I truly believe that we require a variety of modalities to heal and do inner work. We have to work with our bodies, with our minds, with our souls, and parts work, or specifically internal family systems, is a revolutionary therapeutic tool for navigating the dynamics of the psyche. It truly changed my life when I discovered it years ago now. So I want to talk with you about what parts work is. I'm going to give you examples, and I'm also going to share some really great book recommendations to dive deeper. And you will also learn a few ways that you can get started right away on your own without a therapist. By the way, I'm Conni Biesalski. I'm a nervous system specialist. I'm a somatic trauma practitioner, as well as a breathwork and meditation teacher. And on this channel, we explore the tools and strategies to help you recover from chronic stress, from anxiety, from trauma, so that you can live a happy, joyful, and peaceful life. And I have helped dozens and dozens of clients and students of mine transform their lives using parts work. So let's dive in. Now let's set the stage. Let's talk about how we're programmed. Since the moment you were born, your human body and your human mind have been trying to learn how to behave, how to adjust to this world, to your caregivers. And so we learn what behaviors our parents find acceptable and which behaviors result in disconnection or punishment. We learn adaptations and survival strategies to secure love, safety, and belonging, even if they require us to disconnect from our authentic selves. And as Gabor Mate says, if a child has to choose between authenticity and connection, it will always choose connection. So many of us, most of us, probably everybody, has to, at some point in their lives growing up, has to start suppressing their authentic selves. And these strategies often become deeply ingrained patterns, shaping how we show up in relationships, how we handle conflict, and how we navigate intimacy. And the same is true for traumatic experiences or attachment wounding, right? So these patterns are what we call parts of our psyche. And unresolved trauma and emotional wounding fragments our psyche. We basically push these painful, overwhelming experiences and unprocessed emotions outside of our conscious awareness. And these fragmented pieces are essentially separate parts. And when triggered, these parts can take over the present moment, can take over the stage, and causing us as adults to feel, behave, and think like our younger selves. Sometimes we literally behave like a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old. As the founder of Internal Family Systems, Richard Schwartz, likes to say, parts are little inner beings who are trying their best to keep you safe. And we'll get to the meaning of this quote in just a moment. And I have another wonderful quote by the American poet Walt Whitman that is, I think, a fair introduction to parts work. He says, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." What a beautiful, beautiful quote. Now, we are made to believe that we operate based on a mono mind, that we are a singularity. It's like when I'm angry, all of me is angry. And when I'm anxious, all of me is anxious. But according to parts work approaches, you're not one single part. You're not one single mind. We have multiple personalities that make up our psyche. So you're not anxious, a part of you is anxious. You're not depressed, a part of you is depressed. And you're not unworthy, a part of you feels unworthy. Now, just think about your personality when you're at work or with clients and how that differs from when you are with your partner or best friends. Or you might also notice while ordering at a restaurant that one part of you wants to order the vegan cheeseburger and feel celebratory, while another wants to order a salad and feel healthy. Now, these are simplified examples, but they serve to show you that we're not always the same, and we often have conflicting inner parts that are active within us at different times. So think of your mind as a family. Some parts are loud and protective, like a parent, and others are like scared kids. And the goal isn't to fight any of them, but to listen and understand them. Now, the problem is we often judge our own behaviors or that of others. We often don't want to feel our emotions and we push them away or we suppress them. But what if the solution in healing ourselves lies in fully accepting and welcoming all parts of ourselves, right? It turns out that healing isn't a matter of fixing ourselves or getting rid of parts of us that sort of mess up our lives or how we feel. Healing is rather a natural byproduct of getting to know these parts of our psyche in a compassionate way. Now, here's a personal example. I used to have a strong inner critic that told me I wasn't good enough. It felt like an enemy, and I felt like I needed to silence it because it just really made my life very miserable, and it would just constantly tell me how bad I was, how I messed up, and all of that. Now, through parts work, I realized that this inner critic part was trying to protect me from rejection. And when I stopped fighting it and I started listening, everything started to shift. Now, I also have a perfectionist part that used to turn every YouTube video idea into a PhD thesis, and then eventually I would get overwhelmed. I would either abandon the video project or it would take me months to actually create, and publish the video. I also used to have an anxious part that got really needy in relationships and needed a lot of reassurance because it was scared of being abandoned. Now, these are just a few parts of my inner family, and it's really fascinating to discover what's actually going on inside yourself and inside your psyche. Okay, so what is parts work exactly? Parts work is based on the concept that within each person, there are multiple personalities or sub-personalities, in other words, parts, that interact with one another. And these parts develop in response to trauma and conditioning in our childhood and often run our behaviors and our lives and our interactions with other people. And each part has its own needs and desires. And often different parts, they want different things and have different agendas. And so when the needs and the drives of these inner different parts clash, inner conflicts and challenges arise, such as anxiety, depression, and other sort of mental and physical health issues. And so parts work aims to help people resolve these inner conflicts and help people develop a healthier relationship with themselves, with all these parts, and actually bring peace into their inner family. And so we all have parts of our psyche, right? You probably also have an inner critic or maybe an anxious part or some other protector. So you're not going to feel, your deep-seated anger or grief. So if you look at it that way, we're all just these walking inner families with all these different parts. Now, I'm sure you've heard of inner child work, and your inner child is a part of your inner family. So basically, if you've been doing inner child work, you've been doing parts work. Now, I focus in this video on internal family systems and the modality itself because it's a much broader way to work with all these different parts of ourselves and not just with the inner child. And so IFS, in short, is a model of how the psyche and our personality is structured. It was, as mentioned, developed by Richard Schwartz, and it combines different modalities, really, different approaches like shadow work, mindfulness, somatics, self-compassion, inner child work, nonviolent communication. So it's really beautiful in that way. And it's super, super powerful. In IFS, parts are divided into 3 categories. We have managers, we have firefighters, and we have exiles. Now, the managers and firefighters, they're also called protectors. Okay, and protectors, they help protect the system. And managers, they're parts that protect us from potential threats, from potential future conflicts, future pain. And they plan in advance strategies to make sure that certain bad things do not happen again. So for example, a perfectionist manager is concerned with avoiding mistakes or making errors and to really prevent rejection or criticism or failure. And for example, a overthinking manager tries to maintain control to prevent feeling pain or to prevent feeling what's going on inside the body. Now, firefighters are the parts of us that take the lead when we feel triggered. So if you have a tendency to explode in rage when a conversation gets really difficult, that's a firefighter. Or do you find yourself binge eating after a stressful day? That's also a firefighter. So managers, they tend to protect by being proactive, and firefighters protect by being reactive. And then we have the 3rd category of parts, which is exiles. Exiles are parts of our psyche that carry deep emotional wounds and painful memories or core negative beliefs. And these parts are often linked to early childhood experiences or trauma or just moments of intense vulnerability where you felt unsafe, where you felt unloved or unworthy. And so they're basically frozen in time. And they carry these raw, vulnerable emotions like shame and fear and grief or sadness. And they also often hold negative core beliefs like I'm unlovable, I'm a burden, I'm worthless. So they're really child consciousness, right? They're stuck in when you were still a child. Now then we have what is called the self, the capital S self. And that is the calm, compassionate center that can lead and that can heal these parts. And so when we're in self, we are in adult consciousness. Now the question is, what part is in the driver's seat at any given moment, especially when you're triggered? Is it a protector? Is it an exile? Or are you actually in self? I would say most of us, when we're triggered, we're usually in a protector part, maybe a firefighter, right? And then underneath that is an exile that the firefighter is actually protecting so we don't have to feel the pain of the exile. Now, when it comes to parts, what's really important to know, and this brings me to my first book recommendation for you, by the founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz. It's called No Bad Parts. So what does that mean? Well, when we look at all of our parts, it's really easy to judge them or criticize them. But as Richard Schwartz says, there are no bad parts. Each part has a role. Each part has good intentions, no matter how bad the outcome, no matter how much suffering the part actually causes. In IFS, we're not trying to make any of our parts go away. We're not trying to make them disappear. We actually welcome all of our parts in. So in contrast to many other therapeutic approaches where we try to get rid of a certain behavior or a way of thinking, like in CBT therapy, this is a whole new way of dealing with our issues. It's a very welcoming way. It's a very compassionate way. And I truly believe that compassion, self-compassion, is the way to healing. Now, if you're wondering, how do I even recognize my inner parts? Well, they communicate to us in 4 different ways. They communicate with us through thoughts that come in the shape of words, they communicate through thoughts that come in images, they communicate through bodily sensations, and they communicate, of course, through emotions, sometimes experienced as a vague sense, but nevertheless emotions. Now here's another example from my own life. I used to have this very anxious part in relationships and when I was dating, and this part believed that my worth depended on their love and their attention, the person I was dating. But really what that part was protecting was this exile that had a massive fear of abandonment. And this fear originated when I was a young girl and I had an experience where I felt really alone when I really needed someone. And this exile part was also rooted in unworthiness, and it believed that I'm not lovable unless I perform, unless I please, and unless I stay small. And it had this big fear that if I'm not perfect, I'll be rejected. So the anxious attachment pattern, that part, is essentially an internal survival strategy. And so my protector parts, they learn to manage the pain of abandonment by clinging, by overgiving, and by people-pleasing. So if you imagine your psyche to be this big castle with all these rooms, with IFS, room by room, hallway by hallway, you can study the mansion or the castle of your own mind, of your own heart, of your body, of your soul for yourself. And you do this by getting to know the living psychological energies and entities that occupy all of these rooms and corridors, which I think is pretty awesome. Now, parts are also connected to different nervous system states, and that's what makes this so beautiful, because we can take IFS and actually use different approaches to look at it. Now, each part has its own strategies and it has its own way of how it shows up in the body as sensations. So each part carries its own sort of nervous system tone, right? Like think about anxiety, think about panic, think about shutdown and depression. These are all parts that also show up in the body. So when a part takes over, its tone, its flavor becomes the dominant state in the body. Now, how can parts work resolve trauma and triggers and old patterns? Well, the first step is by recognizing our triggers. It's about noticing when a part takes over and then identifying how old it is and what emotions and sensations are associated with that part. Now, the second step is compassionate inquiry. So instead of judging ourselves, we approach these parts with curiosity, with care and empathy. This is really important, because then the next step is that we want to build trust with our protector parts by really integrating them through acceptance and being compassionate with them. We want to make these parts feel seen. We want to make these parts feel understood. We want to inquire about their needs. And then we want to eventually connect to our wounded parts, these exiles that live inside of us, and give them a voice and release the burdens that they've been carrying oftentimes for many decades. And through this process, we integrate our parts into a cohesive family. We reintegrate these fragmented parts of ourselves by fostering trust, by addressing their unmet needs. They can then sort of gradually reintegrate into the adult self. And lastly, we have to rebuild trust in the self, capital S self. We want to help our parts recognize that the self can handle emotional pain, that it can hold space for connection, and that it can set boundaries without fear of abandonment. Now, the cool thing is you can do parts work either with a therapist. There's a lot of IFS therapists out there, and many therapists are being trained in IFS to add into their toolbox. And I'm also trained in IFS as a coach and also integrated into my work with clients and my students. And so you can go that route, which is very awesome, highly recommended. But you can also do parts work on yourself, by yourself, and I do this all the time. And there is several ways that you can do this. There's 3 ways, or actually 4 ways maybe. The first way is that you can do IFS meditations on YouTube. There's a ton of people who share their IFS meditations, their guided practices where they guide you to explore your parts and your exiles. And that is a really wonderful way to explore and work with IFS. The second way is by using journaling prompts. And for that, let me show you another really beautiful book that I highly recommend you get if you're interested in parts work in IFS. And it's this book. It is Self-Therapy by Jay Earley. It's a wonderful read, and there's a ton of exercises and journaling prompts that you can go through on your own, and they're very, very powerful. So definitely get this book, but also get this book. There's a lot of exercises in Richard Schwartz's book as well. He's written many books on parts work. This is just one of them. I think it's his latest one. It's easily accessible and highly recommended. Now you can do these journaling prompts in these books, but there's also another way, which is these days you can use ChatGPT, and there are some ChatGPT bots, or however you want to call them, where you can literally go through the entire IFS process as if you were talking to a therapist, which is a really cool way. I've tested it out a few times and I actually really enjoyed it. And lastly, I prepared a few questions that you can use right away when you finish this video to explore and get in touch with your own protector parts, which is the first step really in IFS. For this, I invite you to find a part that you would like to work with. You can either just kind of inquire within and see if there's a part that wants to volunteer. And if there aren't any parts that want to volunteer to do the work, then you can just also think of a recent situation where a part of you was activated or triggered, and just kind of recall the situation. And then just kind of go within first and really notice in your body where you feel that part and what you feel exactly, right? So I like to sometimes touch areas of my body where I'm feeling the sensation. So it could be a part that was really angry, that was triggered, and maybe you're feeling that anger in your chest and your belly, and maybe you want to just place your hands there, but you don't have to. And then when you've connected to the part in your body and you located it, then you can ask the part a few questions. What are you concerned about? What is your job? What do you hope to accomplish by playing this role, by doing this job? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't perform this job, this role? And just see what comes up and journal it out. And then the next step is to really express your authentic curiosity and compassion to the protector part. And if it feels true, you might consider saying something like, I understand why you're performing this role, why you're doing what you do. Or, wow, I really appreciate your efforts on my behalf. Or, I know you've been working very hard. It must be exhausting. And then just see what shifts inside of you. Maybe the part responds, and then just let that settle. And you can always come back to that part, engage in a dialogue with them, and just see what happens. But this is a first step to get to know your parts, to engage with them. Now, I hope you get a good understanding of what parts work and IFS is. And now if you want to dive deeper into all things healing and inner work, I highly recommend you check out this video. Thanks for watching. See you soon.